I am back. Yours truly, Vito Chirco, signing on for the 17th now episode of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Alongside me, as usual, is my sidekick, my partner in crime now, as he's become throughout all these episodes, the Doc from Doc and Jock, John, the man Macaroon. John, what's going on today?
It's a great day. Looking forward to the podcast. Lots of news happened with the Tigers. Man, Vito, you take 1 week off. Just 1 week, and lots of news and notes to talk about. You booked a great guest for us to talk to regarding the Tigers' offseason moves and potentially some things that he's been written about. So
yes.
You've put together a nice podcast, and I'm excited to see what you got. So break it all down. What the heck happened since you last came on this podcast?
So K-Rod and Cameron Maben were acquired. I really like K-Rod. Now, he's not going to be a high-volume K guy, striking out guys like he used to be when he was known officially as K-Rod. Really no longer is that guy with that moniker that can carry around that moniker with some valid reasoning or credibility. He's not the K-Rod of old, but he's still good. Still a good, strike thrower, all that, good command. Uses his changeup 43% of the time, I believe now. So alleviating himself from using that fastball, which isn't as high of velocity now that he can throw it with. Like 90, can touch 91 maybe, more like 90. But you can still K enough batters. And he K'd 9.7, I think, per 9 last season with the Brew Crew as their closer. So he's officially now become the closer in Motown already without even throwing a pitch. Because right now they're not going to use Wilson. They're not going to use Rondon or Hardy as that closer. It has to be K-Rod unless they go out and sign somebody else, such as Astoria, which I don't see happening now because I think he's priced himself out of the Tigers' budget, room, market, whatever you want to call it. Because their payroll is, remember, already high with these big names, big contracts on their payroll. They don't want to pay somebody a lot of money when they can make shrewd moves like they did for K-Rod, which works out as well because you found your closer via that shrewd move.
Now, any concern at all that the same thing that happened with former general manager Dave Dombrowski, you had to give up a young prospect in order to get Francisco Rodriguez. It was a trade with the Brewers. I think we gave up Betancourt.
Javier Betancourt, which I've never heard of, honestly, before this. I know he's not a top prospect, but some say he's still highly regarded within the organization. That might be more of just people pubbing up what they had in him in the farm system. I don't think he was a great prospect. Never will be a top-tier guy in the minors as a prospect or at the major league level. Probably he will end up projecting to be, coming out to be a utility guy or a middle infielder that's a backup infielder, to sum it up. So he's not going to be a starter at the major league level. So for me, you give that up to get a closer in K-Rod, who's proven himself over the years.
Now,
big time.
I liked the move initially when it was announced, getting K-Rod. Now, I wish we would have gotten him when he was in his prime, because look what happened. Now, our recent memory is of having Joe Nathan, who was also dominant the year before we got him. And what goes first with age? Your ability to throw a consistent slider, curveball, and, of course, miles per hour. So let's just say, for example, your last season, he averaged around, like you said, 89 to 90 miles per hour. Let's just say with age or with some wear and tear on that arm, he goes down another mile an hour to 88, 89. Now you're saying, okay, now you're going to put pressure on his other pitches to locate them and to get strikes. So it's going to be incumbent upon him early on to establish himself as the dominant guy. Not his first couple appearances letting 3-4 guys on base, getting knocked around, because that will set panic in this town, because it just seems like the closer position for the Tigers has ranked up there now with like the Lions quarterback, the Red Wings goalie, as a position that we're looking at and we haven't had success. So I'm hoping that this move from Avila, one of his first moves, is going to come to fruition, and he produces. He has to produce early, and hopefully the starters give him some lead, and the club gives him some leads to show us what he's got.
Well, you know what, Frankie, as I like to call him, he is known as that too, along clubhouse war lines, people inside the clubhouse, people on the inside, they know K-Rod as a guy that I guess has some fun too. People like him, all these, Venezuelans on the Tigers, between the lines, I'll say. And for me, Frankie has to get it done early, like you said, but I'm not too worried about his velocity being a concern. I don't think that will be a concern where it goes down any further either. I think it'll stick to what it's at, and I expected him, honestly, to be older. He's only 33.
On paper. Now,
Well, yeah, it could be a lie. It could be stretching a little bit,
He could be 37. These Venezuelans and their birthdays, there was a couple stories back where the accuracy of their birthdays was kind of in question. So, on paper, 34 years old.
Yeah, well, 33, and it might be 34, might be 35, who knows, because we can't always expect to trust the age is given to us as the true age, as you said. But a guy from Venezuela, like I said, should really mesh in the clubhouse, should be beloved, I think. So I like the move based on everything that we've talked about, and what they had to give up was minuscule, to sum it up. So for me, a good move by the Tigers and Avila, and his first move made as the GM and executive vice president of club operations.
So, Vita, you give it a thumbs up?
I give it a thumbs up. I give it an A, actually, right now. Maybe an A- because he's not old, but he's 33, and his velocity is at 90. He could flare up where he has some problems maybe as a closer this year, pitching in the American League, which is usually the tougher league to face hitters in. So maybe K-Rod will, maybe his K numbers will go down a little bit, despite the fact that he was so good even without that fastball velocity last year. And that's why I say still, because he was so good without that fastball velocity last year, with throwing that changeup, mixing it in 43% of the time or something, and that high number, there's a high percentage of pitches where it's the changeup. So for me, if he keeps doing that to that high level of success, it doesn't matter what he throws for velocity. That's why I'm not concerned overall-wise with K-Rod, and like the move, and like I said, I gave it a thumbs up.
Yeah, and then it kind of shakes it. It shakes out to have a nice, back end of the bullpen. You could throw Alex Wilson out there in the 7th, Rondon in the 8th if he gets his stuff together, and then you got your proven closer with K-Rod. So you have a potential now if Wilson can continue his success from last year, if Rondon can be a little bit more professional and get guys out in the 8th, you have the makings of a 7th, 8th, 9th that you can roll out there and maybe get guys out, and you can interchange that. And Wilson came on late last year, and he showed that he can do some things. A little bit inconsistent towards the end, but he did show enough, I believe, to earn another year in the bullpen, and Rondon's going to be the big question mark. But so far, so good. I agree with you. Thumbs up for now.
They need another arm, though, in the bullpen to support what Hardy, what Wilson do. What they did was great last year. What they can do has to be as good as that, though, this year. Will they be as good? Like Blaine Hardy came out of nowhere kind of to be that good last year. Wilson was kind of expected to be something, but he was even better than expected, too. So for me, those guys have to be consistently productive once again in their 7th and 8th inning roles. But the Tigers need probably another lefty, a veteran lefty like an Oliver Perez who can get on the cheap, and maybe adding other arms such as, it's been talked about now, Sean Kelly, Antonio Bastardo, who's pitched for the Phillies now, was good with the Phils out of the bullpen. Maybe he comes to Motown, pitches out of the pen in the 8th inning as that setup man. Because it's still where I think they're missing that one guy at the back end of games. You got K-Rod in the 9th. He's sufficiently that guy as your closer. He can do that. But the 8th inning, 7th inning now, Hardy, Wilson. Who's really that 8th inning guy, though? I think it's Wilson to start off, but if he struggles, you don't really want to have to just be able to rely upon Blaine Hardy or have to rely upon Al Albuquerque, guys like that, to fill the void then if Wilson struggles. That's why I think you need that one veteran arm still for the back end of the pen, who you can get on the cheap, and there are cheap options out there. You don't have to make another trade for an Andrew Miller or sign a guy like Soria or even Darren O'Day. You can maybe get Bastardo, maybe Kelly on the cheap, and sufficiently fill that void alongside Wilson at the back end of games in the 8th inning, and then also alongside Hardy, who's probably more that 7th inning guy. But as I said before, too, I didn't like how Brad Ausmus had for sure use one guy in a defined role in the 8th or 7th inning. It shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, he definitely is going to have to improve how he uses that bullpen and what situations he brings in K-Rod for maybe a 4-out save, or how he chooses to use the bullpen. Because last year it was obvious there was some things. It was obvious that he struggled, and overall his in-game managing kind of was subpar, maybe graded as a C last year. He has to improve on that, and I do believe that with another year of experience, with maybe a new pitching coach, there can be a little bit more, better decision-making in regards to using the bullpen in the right situations, when to take out the starter and when to use the bullpen. And I fully hope that occurs. Now, another name from the past came to the organization. Were you surprised at all that Lloyd McClendon was let go that fast? I mean, he only had a couple seasons with the Mariners. It didn't go all that great. Now he's kind of a manager that has bounced around. And when we talked about it on the Doc and Jock podcast regarding him prior to the Ausmus hiring, I said that, Lloyd McClendon is one of those guys like a Dusty Baker that's just kind of bounced around, and he hasn't even had the level of success that Dusty Baker's had. He's one of those guys that kind of has been a retread, but now he's back. He's going to coach the AAA Mud Hens, and I think it's a solid move. I mean, you're going to have your young players be coached by someone who's been with the organization, kind of knows the inner workings, has worked with Ausmus, has worked with Jim Leland in the past, so he's got a lot of experience, and he can be an asset.
I like it for AAA, but I think he's breathing down the man that is Brad Ausmus.
You think so?
I think he's coming for his job potentially. I think he's that interim manager and waiting if they fire Ausmus. That's why they hired Lloyd McClendon. And more power to Avila in the front office for doing so, being smart, looking forward into the future, knowing that maybe this guy can be the guy that we replace Ausmus with if we decide to fire him if the team struggles to start the season. That's why I believe they truly hired him to coach the Mud Hens at the AAA level.
Oh, wow. See, I don't see how that's, I know he's got a lot of experience in baseball, but he just has...
He hasn't had a huge level of success, you're right, with the Pirates or with the M's, besides for his first year in Seattle, which was a great season. The Mariners still overachieved that season, exceeded expectations. And he was a skipper for that ball club to lead them to 87 wins, I believe it was, in 2014. Last year, the club struggled when they had mighty high expectations, could achieve those, and they were expected to reach the postseason. Never even came close to that, finished below 500. He was ousted, and it was because a new GM took over, Jerry DiPoto, formerly of the Halos of Anaheim. So with that being said, Lloyd McClendon really never had a chance to stay on for a third season in Seattle. But now from coaching in the minors, being the manager of the Toledo Mud Hens, I don't mind that whatsoever because he has some experience, has played in the majors, has coached in the big leagues. He can mentor these guys, teach them as well what it takes to get to the next level because he's been there and he's managed at that level and coached at that level as well. First as a bullpen coach, then as the hitting coach for the Tigers, and I think people respect him as a hitting coach, and maybe him and Leon Bull Durham, who I believe is still the hitting coach at AAA as well, can mentor these young hitters who could use some help, such as a Steven Moya. A guy like that who could use a ton of help, because right now he's not ready at all to play at the major league level, even as a fourth outfielder. So I like the hire. Don't love the hire because he's still not the highly respected guy who is this great manager, game in, game out, with his, ability to be a game strategist and whatnot and making in-game decisions. He's not respected for that. But at the AAA level, in the minors overall-wise, it's about mentoring players, teaching them what it takes to get it done and perform at the next level, and at a high level at the next level. He knows that at least, and that's why I respect Avila for hiring McClendon and having a backup option as well. It's a safety valve in case they fire Ausmus at the beginning of the season or at the All-Star break, and the Tigers come out of the gate and struggle big time. Because it would take where I think the Tigers are under 10 games to fire Ausmus. But at that point, I think they pull the trigger and do it.
So if Ausmus struggles and he's the guy that's gone, if Avila fires him, you think Lloyd McClendon's the next guy in line?
I think McClendon's the guy in waiting right now, and that's why they hired him truly. And because of his former experience as a big league manager, can offer some guys some good advice and tips at the AAA level with the Mud Hens.
Now, the latest move that was made kind of opened some eyes because of the historic value of the trade, and we'll talk about that shortly. But I do want to kind of talk about now, with Ian Kroll being shipped off to Atlanta, there are no players available left from the Doug Fister trade. So what happened earlier was Ian Kroll was traded to the Atlanta Braves for Cameron Maybin. And so now all the pieces that were brought to the Tigers for Doug Fister going to Washington are now gone. And I really feel like, a lot of people haven't looked at this, but you gave up Doug Fister, a guy who was a widely respected number 3, who could have been, with a little bit more potential, viewed as a number 2. But he was a solid 3-4 back-of-the-line starter. And he was productive here in Detroit. He was, a pitcher that came over from Seattle, and he brought some good... He pitched very well, very effective.
Really well. I mean,
yeah,
right?
above average, yeah.
Above average starter who, I think you nailed it on the head, too, was a number 2 starter, realistically, with this production. Wasn't slotted as that in the Tigers' rotation because of their depth. Huge, extreme amount of depth. But on other starting rotation staffs, he would have been the guy that was a number 2 at least. So he was never expected to be that, to perform in that role for the Tigers. But now at this point, Doc, he's not a number 2, and I think you realize that too. He's not a number 3 even, but a number 4, number 5, and a steady number 5 for sure, and much more consistently good and productive than the likes of Buck Farmer. Those guys that we had to go through last year were miserable, those minor league options. They're not going to be the 5th starter this year. Even Shane Green, more likely than not, will not be the 5th starter.
Can you recall who was the pitcher now that we had on our team?
Yep.
That went off to Arizona? What was his?
Robbie Ray was dealt.
Robbie Ray. Now, when he was with
kind
us,
of good in Arizona, but he wasn't great towards the end.
He was the
too.
feature piece.
He was.
And when he was here, he struggled. But then last year, he kind of showed what the expectations were. So in the end, you might have given up a solid pitcher a little bit early,
at least, right?
A little bit early.
Yeah.
So in the end, when you look at this trade, the Doug Fister trade, I really believe it's a move and a big mistake that might have resulted in Dave Dombrowski, one of the reasons why he's no longer with the club. You gave up a productive member of your team, in essence now, for nobody. Nobody.
Everyone's gone now. You were referencing that too, how they dealt him in the Maybin trade, but he wasn't going to be utilized in any capacity out of the pen going forward because he stunk it up. He wasn't good enough. And it really shows how bad that trade was for Dave D.
Yeah,
it was a miserable move. Dealing
feel
Fister for that return that he got, which now, like you said, is completely
a disaster.
Yeah.
You can rate it as a disaster. So when you look at it, even now Robbie Ray's gone. You don't know if he's going to be consistent. He had a better year in Arizona, but in the end, I believe that if there was more patience shown by Dombrowski, if he was willing to shop Fister, I think you could have got much more in return for him at the time. And so that trade, I believe, is going to be one that is going to be talked about here a long time because that was the beginning of the deconstruction of the team and the beginning of the window starting to come down. It wasn't the window shut ceiling. It was kind of the beginning of the windowsill just kind of cracking down, and you can start with the Doug Fister trade.
It was the beginning of the demise of Dave D as a GM and club president. I think it proved right then and there things weren't going his way. It started the trend of things not going his way, at least to a large degree.
Did you think Robbie Ray, Kroll, the guys that we got would have been productive? Did you think, what was your initial evaluation when that, I don't know if we ever talked about it, what was your initial thought when Dave Dombrowski made that move? Were you like, or what did you think?
Was kind of concerned about the return to start off, though. I thought they could have gotten Tyler Clipper. People thought they were going to get him in the deal. Didn't get him, got the likes of, as we said, those three guys who didn't turn out to be anything. Lombardozzi didn't even last more than half a season. Didn't even last half a season with the Tigers. They dealt him for Alex Gonzalez. So Gonzalez was on the opening day roster, got one big hit in the opening day game.
And that was
America, game winner, and that was it. Then he flamed out and was cut. That's how we got for Lombardozzi, one of the pieces of that deal, who people thought was a gritty utility guy, could play in the outfield, play the infield. He's really probably going to be a guy that bounces around now. He's going to be a journeyman. Kroll's going to be a journeyman lefty. He's not good enough to get it done consistently. He proved that. Tigers dealt him for that reason. And Ray was the key integral piece, the big trade piece in that deal for what we got in the deal for Fister. But he didn't pan out with the Tigers. Now he has more and more with the D-backs since they dealt him over there to get Shane Green as part of that deal. So it's something that I think Dave D,
when he looks back, will say, I made a mistake.
When he looks back, I think it'll be his biggest mistake. With the Tigers, it was his worst deal. I'll say that right now. I didn't know that then, but it's definitely his worst deal at this point.
And the Renteria deal wasn't that great. His signing, when he came, he was a shell of himself.
Well, they traded Jair Jurgens, who flamed out there. He was good for a while. Looked like the Tigers made a huge mistake like they did when they traded Smoltz to the Braves. But then he got hurt, Jurgens, and now is a minor leaguer because of injuries. So it wasn't the worst deal because I think still Ray might be productive. He's still young. Could have been a fourth, fifth starter last year. And this year, going into 2016, could definitely be that fifth starter now, if not the fourth starter. And he really pitched to the tune of that kind of success with the D-backs as that fourth starter, fifth starter last year. If he gets better, he's a middle of the rotation guy that you gave up for a guy as part of the Shane Green deal. And Shane Green he's a fifth starter. That's not a totally great option to have.
And he was injured. So we got to see glimpses of his start. I mean, not to rub it in a little bit, but I think the paper that you currently work for had Shane Green, Cy Young candidate, ?
At the very beginning of the year when he looked good. And Simon looked very good, the big pasta, who, you know what, I wouldn't mind coming back as a fifth starter a lot more than I'd rather have Farmer be used in that role, Matt Boyd right now, or Shane Green.
But when Shane Green got hurt, man, we got a lot of memes from him. And
they went from him being a Cy Young candidate to being not even a fifth starter to being a minor leaguer and like a minor league fifth starter. That's how bad he was with the Tigers in the second half of the season.
All right, so now Kroll was traded to Atlanta. We got back Cameron Maybin, and if you recall that name, he was the piece that we sent to the Marlins to get Miguel Cabrera. So now it kind of comes full circle. The man one of the pieces that was traded to the Marlins is now back with the Detroit Tigers, and he's going to look to now solidify potentially playing in center field or left field. It could allow he could bounce around a little bit. It's going to allow him the Tigers flexibility. Tyler Collins now is likely going to be in the outfield as well. So you're likely to have an outfield of Ghosts, Cameron Maybin, and Tyler Collins. And it's okay. This trade likely ends the run of Rajai Davis in Detroit. They said they made him an offer, but I think with this move, you kind of realize now Rajai Davis is the odd man out.
He is. He's not going to return. And he was good, better than Ghost, but not a great defensive left fielder or center fielder. People even say he was worse in left field, which is surprising, because you would think he could cover at least left field with all that speed. And center field has enough speed, but just not a great glove guy. Ghost is better in that regard, better arm too, better for center field. But the thing is, I don't love Ghost to be the starter either every single day. And right now he might have to be, because if you don't sign, you got Martinez, remember, to JD Martinez. Did you mention him? JD Martinez?
That's right.
So, yeah, I was about to say, because that lineup, what you just gave to me as the alignment for the outfield is horrible. That'd be a AAA starting outfield.
I'm saying
Martinez is in right field.
Yep, and Ghost and Maben are going to...
Ghost and Maben have to platoon in center, and Maben might play a lot of left field, too, because Ghost is going to be that primary guy, I think, using the platoon in center field. But I still would like to see Maben out there and another guy be added to alleviate Ghost being used all that often. And even Maben, who really wasn't great with the bat last year, was good in the first half. Then he had a cornea injury and had some bad batting stats in the second half. So maybe he will recover, but if he doesn't, he's not going to be that great of a guy. And with that said, he'll be more of a fourth outfielder because he can't hit good enough to be a starting guy. But Ghost, there's the same issue with that. And in that platoon, really, both guys only hit from the one side very well, remember, too. They don't hit from both sides. In that platoon, if you want a platoon there, a true good one, efficient one, you need a guy that hits each side well. One guy that can hit left, one guy that can hit from the right side well. They don't really have that right now with that platoon of Ghost and Maben. And that's why I believe they might still add a guy, but I think they like Collins a little bit too, and they want to save money and conserve the budget, leave some budget room for starting pitchers, for at least one, if not two, and I think it'll be 2 starting pitchers and another bullpen arm. That's why I don't see them addressing it big time and getting a big-name outfielder like a Cespedes to play left field next year, or Alex Gordon, or even Ben Zobrist, who I would love because he could play second and left. But I think it's more realistic they stick it out with Tyler Collins. They let him play out there, and they add another guy, a lesser caliber guy, to platoon even with Collins, to allow Collins not to have to start every day, because I think they realize, too, he can't hit good enough either to start every day there in left field. What's
fascinating is Avila comes out and is like, Cameron Maben is improving as a ball player now. He was, dealt, and he was a top 10 pick for the Tigers. I think he was a first-round pick.
First-round pick, high level, highly regarded guy.
And now he's viewed as an up-and-coming player, and he only batted .267 last year. And then you got Ghost if you platoon him. That's what I was thinking. I'm like, wow, you got 2 batters that are nowhere near 300. Nowhere near.
They're 250 guys, realistically. Maben had that great first half. He probably hit below 250 in the second half. And Ghost had streaks, not consistent at all at the plate.
I'm like, wow, 267 with 10 home runs. And I know I think they like the fact that he had a lot of steals. I think he had 23 steals last year. So
Ghost did it, but he hit 254. Maben had a good amount, too. Were you saying that Maben, you think, had?
I think Maben
had 20...
around that number of steals.
I'll look it up, yeah.
Yeah, so, if that gets you a spot on an opening day roster, I'm like, oh, I like my guys to be a little bit more close to 300.
More all around, but they don't have that right now in center, or really in the outfield.
So basically the question I have is, do you think he'll ever realize his top 10 first-round potential? Or is he basically a mid-level 3-star player?
He's young enough to still realize that potential, but I think he would have already done it by now. And he's had injuries.
Right.
He's had injuries now. He hasn't had a really good productive season at the plate since 2011 or 2012 was his career year. And I can look it up. I'm on his baseball reference page right now. His last really solid year at the plate, you could argue, was 2011 with the Padres. He was good out there at Petco Park. Can cover a lot of ground, speedy guy, can steal bases. He stole 23, just like Ghost did, by the way. They both stole number
23
of stolen bases. So that's the Jordan number. That's a good number to have. And really, honestly, though, outside of that, we're being sarcastic here with the Jordan reference, but if you get 20 or more steals, that's a really good number. And really 15 or above. But these guys who are speedy guys, leadoff material guys, especially if they can hit a little bit better, but if you are the leadoff guy, you should be able to steal 15, 20 bases because you want to get on base and then get into scoring position through your speed. So can these guys be good base stealers too consistently?
Wally Joyner's still the hitting coach.
He's the hitting coach, correct.
So maybe he'll get working.
They might
with him.
refine his craft a little bit at the plate because Maben, I think, could be more that starter if he fulfills what he has been promised to do expected to do for the longest time now, which is hit like a guy such as Ken Griffey Jr. He came up with all those mighty large expectations to be a top-tier center fielder, to be a Mike Trout kind of outfielder who hits for average and power, as an all-around guy, and almost a 5-tool guy, if not the 5-tool guy that Ken Griffey Jr. was, and then Mike Trout is nowadays. But for me, he's more of a 3-tool guy, or I don't even know how many, because it's hard to decipher what are the real tools that are used when you talk about 5 tools. But he's at least got the speed, some kind of defensive ability with the glove, even though his UZR, some of those rankings and ratings out there, like defensive zone rating, wasn't that great last year. And that concerns me. But I think he still can play good enough with the glove, can steal some bases, but it might end there. That would make him a 2-tool player, which isn't good enough to be a starter. But then the concern is Ghost, Doc, as you were kind of getting at, is another 250 kind of guy, maybe 260. He's probably a 2-tool player as well. So they don't have a true starting center fielder. But Maben, still, for what they had to give up, getting rid of Ian Kroll and Gabe Spire, who they got in the Rick Porcello trade with the Bo Sox, I didn't mind that, giving up those guys. They weren't top-tier prospects or anything that will really amount to anything in the future for the Tigers. So for me, I'm still fine with that deal because Maben adds at least something. At least something there for the Tigers.
So after we speak with Lynn Henning, who's about to join us on the podcast, we'll revisit our thoughts about Cameron Maben, how he shakes up in the lineup, and we'll talk about Maben to end the podcast. But coming up next, after this brief message, we will have Lynn Henning on the phone, and we'll talk about these moves and get his opinions on all things Detroit Tigers. So stay with us on the Chirco and Company podcast, Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Doc here for FanaticU.com, Detroit Sports official outfitter and the official outfitter of the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Go to visit FanaticU.com. And if you go online and pick up the great selection of Tigers, Pistons, Lions, and Wings gear, use the promo code at checkout, DSP. That's promo code DSP, Vito. And if you use that promo code, you'll save 15% off your entire order. Now, FanaticU.com has been great to the podcast. They've been very supportive. And now, anybody at all that goes online at FanaticU.com, and when they buy anything at all, even a clearance item, if they start their Christmas shopping early, if they pick up, an Andre Drummond jersey, if they pick up hats, socks, anything that at all to support your teams, anything at all that you buy, if you make a purchase online at FanaticU.com and you use the promo code DSP, your email will be entered into a contest, and FanaticU is going to give away a $100 gift card to one of the lucky purchasers at FanaticU.com. So take advantage of that. You could start the new year off with a $100 gift card. Support those who support us. FanaticU.com, Detroit Sports official outfitter. And now back to Chirco and Company on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
And now with me on this edition of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company is Lynn Henning of the Detroit News. Lynn, what's going on today?
Happy Thanksgiving week to you, Vito.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to you as well, and should be a fun holiday, always a good thing, joining family for Thanksgiving. And wanted to discuss with you, first and foremost, the Tigers acquisition, specifically, of Francisco Rodriguez. Now, what were your initial thoughts when you heard about the news, Lynn?
I think it's the kind of really sensible move that they needed to make. You have to look at these deals, Vito, with a sense of affordability and practicality. The Tigers were not going to be in position to trade for Craig Kimbrel. You couldn't probably trade for Aroldis Chapman without giving away all of the people that you got last July in those deals at the deadline. So you have to really be sensible about this, and you have to get contracts that are common sense as well. And at the same time, try to get someone that you really believe can be effective. And for that reason, I think it's probably as close to a categorical match as they could have come up with. He's not Aroldis Chapman in terms of coming in and blowing away hitters. He's not any of those kinds of people, but not many are. And if you do have someone like that, they're either going to be extremely expensive contractually, and not only is the contract going to be perhaps prohibitive, but so is the price to acquire. So I think they came out of this pretty well. They gave up the kind of prospect that they could afford to part with there in Betancourt, and they got a guy whose numbers in 2015 were really, really good. And I don't think because he turns 34 in a couple of months that he's likely to lose a lot of that edge. He's not going to be perfect, but I think he's going to be effective.
So they got K-Rod to fill that void at the back end of the game, but now they need something for the back end of the rotation. And a guy that might be added for that role is Doug Fister, formerly of the Tigers. What do you think about the possibility of a reunion happening in Motown for Doug Fister?
I'd be a little surprised by that because I think people are thinking of Doug Fister in terms of what he was when he was here. And this past year with injuries and all, his velocity was way, way, way down. And he never, of course, was a fireballer to begin with. But I think you'd look differently at some of the other candidates. I think Iwakuma, the guy in Seattle, there's probably a greater percentage chance that he'll sign with the Mariners. But he's the kind of guy you need. It wouldn't be shocking me if they went after Scott Kazmir. I think you have to look at people along those lines and rule out the hyper-expensive people. And again, Doug Fister, they certainly would have no problem reuniting in terms of how they feel about each other, but I'm not sure that at this stage that he's viewed as being the effective pitcher that he was previous to last year.
Is he a better option, though, Lynn, than the likes of Buck Farmer, Matt Boyd, and Shane Green at the back end of the rotation?
It depends. He'd have to be throwing better than he did this past season. Otherwise, you're probably better going with one of the youngsters. But I'm not sure it's going to come down to that. I think what they're going to do is invest in 2 free agents, guys that are going to be reasonably trustworthy, and then they'll mix in Fulmer, not Fulmer, but rather Daniel Norris, and then perhaps look at a kid like Fulmer by mid to next season. They don't need to get people here that are going to have to pitch 400 innings over 2 years. They've got now a sufficient number of young arms where they can be a little bit flexible with that 5th spot, but they're going to need someone that they know can really get the job done at that number 4 slot. And for that reason, again, I think it's a Kazmir, it's an Iwakuma, somebody like that on that particular height that they're going to more than likely sign.
How about the likelihood of Jeff Samardzija?
I don't think so. I'm not sure they're opposed to it, but if you look at what Samardzija did after July, it was really sobering. I mean, he fell off the cliff. And that's, again, sometimes the harbinger of bad things coming. So he really hurt not only himself, but he hurt the White Sox terribly in that they should have dealt him and didn't. And now his stock has eroded significantly. Now he can come back and be a potential Cy Young candidate. I mean, he's got the stuff. But why that certainly vacated the premises over the last 2 months of the season has got everybody, I think, a little bit mystified.
Now, you brought up Michael Fulmer. How good do you expect him to be going forward for the Tigers?
He is a plus potential starter for them. He's got such a good arm, and his mentality is such that they have considered him even as a closer. Now, he wouldn't be the first guy with that kind of arm who went from the rotation and found his niche as a closer. I don't know that with Rodriguez on hand that they really feel that there's any need to do that. But he's one of those arrows in the quiver that could be subjected to a role change. Now, they think Shane Green also could be that kind of a guy, believe it or not. And the reason is because that circulatory problem that he had, they think has been corrected. And they're quite sure that was behind his sudden retreat after that great April. In the same manner, you could look to a couple of other people potentially that they could move into that slot. But I think you're counting mostly on guys of that particular extraction, along with Rondon. Now, if Rondon grew up as much as they hope he did, and as much as he has indicated he has, then Rondon can come back into the mix and potentially be your guy too, because there's no question about his arm. In this case, it was his maturity level, and he needed to get older faster. And I think that demotion, being sent back home the way he was, in a very public way, probably let him know that he's in the big leagues now and it was time to grow up.
So then what are the odds of Rondon having a future in Motown?
I think they're good, and I think it'd be a mistake to trade him because his market value right now is a little bit low. If somebody was going to acquire him, it would be because he's available cheap. You don't find too many arms like that. But I think if the Tigers are a little bit patient, and again, if he got the message, which he seems to have gotten with that humiliation and that punishment, then you could see a real turnaround in his psyche, because his stuff is the kind of high-octane fastball slider combination along with a changeup that you don't find everywhere. So I think right now their best bet is to hold on, see whether or not he's turned the corner, and if so, they've got a real weapon there.
Now, Lynn, if the Tigers struggle out of the gate in 2016, what are the chances that they ultimately rebuild and have a fire sale?
I think they're great, and I hate to use that word. I think it's significant that they could find themselves trailing, and by July decide, hey, we gave it a go, but it just wasn't going to happen. Our competition in this division is really good now. It's getting younger and better, and we're going to kind of have to go that route. Now, I think they'd have been better pursuing that policy this offseason, but an owner who still wants to win and who still has a chance to win, wasn't going to see it that way. He's going to try to extract at least one more run out of this group. If it doesn't come off, then I would think you are going to see a wholesale marketing of that roster next July. Now, what happens if they're, say, 4 games out or 5 or 6 or something like that, where you could make a case for them carrying through and trying to compete for a playoff spot? I think that would be the worst of all scenarios. They'd get caught a little bit in between there, and that's a very ominous possibility for me. But I think guys, we're going to have to, wait and see how this all shakes out. They haven't even really configured their roster yet for next year. They'll probably be adding 2 or 3 more pitchers. You don't know really what's in the stars for the winter meetings in 2 weeks or afterward. And I think Avila is doing a pretty good job here. I know he's a good roster assessor. I think he has a good sense for the market, and I think his early deals here have shown that he's got a shot here at being a pretty good captain. My only problem with the Tigers is that I wonder if they're overripe, and that, again, it might have been better for them to have traded whatever saleable commodities they had this offseason, which is a lot, and try to reseed for a more competitive future. But that's not my call. I'm not the owner. And it could be that he and Avila have this thing right.
You brought up even trading Miggy in a piece for the News. How could that How could that become feasible, though, Lynn?
Well, the only way it could be conceivable is if somebody with a lot of wealth simply got so enticed by him and by obviously his for the ages skills that they wouldn't mind taking on the contract. That is always possible in baseball. It just is. We saw A-Rod traded once when he had a supposedly immovable contract. We've seen Luis Pujols go to the Angels and get astronomical sums and still be very effective. And I think the rationale in a lot of the wealthier front offices across baseball is that Miguel Cabrera will have a long shelf life. It could be that next July, again, if things don't go the way Detroit hopes, that he would simply be too irresistible at the trade deadline time for someone not to rationalize and take on the deal. But we're getting way ahead of ourselves there, Vito. I think right now what you have to do is let Avila put together his team, see how good they could be next spring, and then deal with it either way after 80 games. But to try to make that calculation right now in November is pretty tough.
Yeah, it's too premature. And let's look at another deal that he already has made to upgrade the outfield, and that is getting Cameron Maybin from the Braves. What did you think of that move for the Tigers? I
viewed that as being one of those affordable deals. He's not a real big hitter. And his defense is surprisingly inferior if you want to go by the metrics, which I think you have to go on. I'm a little bit surprised by that deal, although I think they believed that Rajay Davis was just a little too long in the tooth, and that they may have hit the expiration date on him. Maybin is very, very skilled, but why that hasn't translated into better defense and a little bit more overall effectiveness, I'm not quite sure. And I've got to be honest with you, I haven't had a chance to really talk with Avila about that yet. And that's one of the first conversations I want to have with him privately. And I think I'm going to learn some things that I don't know today. I've been covering a lot of football the last 6 to 8 weeks, and I haven't been able to speak with him as frequently as I've wanted. But I'm going to the winter meetings in a couple of weeks, and I expect to have a conversation one-on-one with him. And at that point, at least my mystery will be, I think, somewhat cleared up here in terms of why they made that deal and what they felt they were really getting. But I think it comes under the overall canopy of just being an affordable, practical move.
Do you think he'll start more than Ghost in center field, though, as of right now? I know you haven't talked to Avila, but...
I really don't. Well, for one thing, you see more right-handed pitching, of course, than you see left. So Ghost, I'm sure, will be their quasi-regular center fielder. It's nice to have an option there, and particularly against left fielders. But that still would mean that you're going to start a right-handed. I mean, you're going to have Tyler Collins presumably on this team as a fourth outfielder too. So if you want to take out one left-hander and substitute for, there's a lot of ways here that this isn't always going to be, again, a perfect answer unless they have 5 outfielders. But I think right now they're at least in a little better shape than they were. And I wouldn't rule out that Anthony Gose hits a little bit better than some people think. I'm not going to suggest that he's a 300 hitter, but if you look at what he did last year, he was at least 20, 30 points better than a lot of people thought he was going to be. And he's so young, and he does have an awful lot of thoroughbred skills where I think you could make a case for him getting at least marginally better, which isn't all that bad. But to me, it all comes up to answer one question about this team. At least it provides me an answer, and that is that there is no answer to this team. I think they've got a very rough road to hoe. I think they've got a lot of talent, but I really believe they'd have to have such an alignment of pluses and so few negatives, including injuries, that you might make it something of an unrealistic dream to think that this team is going to be a division winner or a playoff team. But again, Vito, I have to say that advisedly because I have to see their roster before we ever get that far into projection.
I'll let you go on that note, Lynn. You have a good one, and we'll talk again soon then, I hope. Maybe after the winter meetings. All right?
Okay, Vito. You're welcome. You bet.
Interesting stuff there from Lynn Henning. He's been covering football lately, and he's going to go check out the winter meetings, and he's going to definitely get in the ear of Avila and wonder and figure out, hey, why is it that you guys targeted Cameron Maybin? Because, like I said, like we talked about before we chatted with him, that he just hasn't been that consistent. He hasn't been worthy of the first-round pick, and he basically at this point in time he's known for being the piece that brought Miguel Cabrera here. So that's not what that's a dubious distinction.
That's been his biggest asset, right? As a major leaguer, getting Miguel Cabrera to come to Motown to become a Silver Slugger, a guy that's won multiple MVP awards, and he's done it all, Miguel Cabrera here. Cameron Maybin hasn't done much in the majors at all. He's been a flash in the pan. Couldn't we say that? We could describe him easily as that and hand him that label. I think he deserves it. Very much so, Doc. So far in his career, having 1.5 good years, at the plate, half a good season with the Braves before he got hurt, that 2011 campaign with the Padres hitting .264, hitting for an OPS of .716, anything above 700 is a starting caliber player's out OPS. Good enough to be a starting player, everyday player, if you hit above 700. So if he hits above that, yeah, he's a starting center fielder, starting left fielder for the Tigers in 2016, but nobody, and I don't think you do either, expects Maybin to hit above 700, to record that high of an OPS is what I'm saying. And then I think nobody expects him to hit either above 265 or 270. I think hitting 270 even, hitting 275 would be great and something that would be kind of unheard of right now for Maybin because he hasn't obviously ever hit above 267 for a season. He hit 267 last year with the Braves. That's his best ever batting average for a complete season. So him hitting 270 would be great for the Tigers to get that out of him in 2016. And it's something that I won't put my money on right now for him to do. And
based on Tigers' luck, it looks like maybe then Ian Kroll will go to Atlanta and just light it up.
Let it up. Hey, Smoltz did it. Jurgens did it for a little bit, then he got hurt. Kroll is just a lefty specialist. But, hey, you never know. The baseball gods have done weirder things to the Tigers and to other baseball clubs. And maybe Maybin even becomes that 275 all-around player that can get it done defensively. But even as Lynn Henning noted, and as I did earlier in the podcast, before Lynn joined us, his defensive metrics were not the greatest there in the outfield for the Braves last year. Surprisingly so, too, and he's got all this speed, all these intangibles to get it done with the glove on a consistent basis and to cover a ton of ground, but he doesn't really cover that much ground or make those plays that you think would be routine for a guy of his athletic caliber. Ton of that, but he's not really a good all-around baseball player, maybe never will, even though he's only 28, as I said earlier. Let's make sure it's 28, like I said. I don't think he'll ever realize the full potential. I don't think he's any longer that guy that was going to be the next Ken Griffey. Obviously, he's not that, but even being an all-star, I don't think he's that either. And Gose isn't that either, but maybe Gose will hit better, like Lynn Henning said. If he does, he'll get most of the starts in center. And Lynn said, too, he's already aligned right now, or in line to get the most starts in center out of that platoon of Maybin and Gose, which really won't be that productive of a platoon, as I said earlier, too, Doc.
Now, early on, and we want to thank again Lynn Henning for coming out from the Detroit News. Early on, the grades for Avila have been that there's been a devotion to international scouting and analytics, that he's brought in guys that can potentially help the club, but at an affordable rate. So far, what's been your assessment of what you've seen and observed with the new Tigers general manager? Because we've already seen now Dave Dombrowski's doing his thing over there in Boston. He's already trading prospects. He brought in the big closer. And everyone was like, finally, you got a closer, Kimbrel. But, hey, you couldn't do it here in Detroit? What took you so long? I mean, he wasted no time. He was like, okay, I had that bad memory, that poor taste in my mouth. Let me ship off as many as I can to get Kimbrel into Boston. What's your been observations with Avila so far?
My philosophy is that the Tigers and Dombrowski wanted to get Kimbrel at the beginning of this past season. Tried to do so, didn't have enough in the farm system to make that move happen. He pulled the trigger quickly then with the Bo Sox, as you said. Good move, maybe not, though, because, hey, look at what they had to give up from the Bo Sox farm system to get Craig Kimbrel, who's just a closer, remember, an elite one, but closers don't pitch every single day, so maybe he gave up too much there. But to answer your question about Avila now, he's been a maker of some shrewd moves. What a man he's been so far, I think. I think, with that being said, he's a guy that should receive a B+ at least for what he's made in terms of moves, getting Cameron Maybin for not much. Also getting K-Rod, your closer, for not much. So I like what he's given up, which hasn't been a great haul of prospects from the Tigers farm system or of young players, to get these more proven veteran players in K-Rod and Cameron Maybin for the Tigers major league roster. So right now, he gets a huge thumbs up for me. I think I'll give him 2. I'll give him 2 thumbs up and a B+ for a grade for his GMing so far for the Tigers.
Okay, so, and pardon me if I didn't hear you correctly, just analyzing the 2 moves. Both GMs got closers. We got one that can do most of the things that Kimbrel can do, but at a much cheaper rate, and we didn't give up as much as Dave Dombrowski did. I kind of like when you evaluate those 2 moves, I like what Avila did over what Dombrowski did. If you look at the advanced analytics, you basically can get there with K-Rod at a much cheaper rate than what Dave had to give up for Kimbrel.
For one guy. And now you have the capability of adding other bullpen arms, such as Bastardo, such as Sean Kelly, such as Oliver Perez. So now you have that ability because you didn't pay as much to get a guy like Kimbrel, or you're not paying as much in salary to have that guy in your roster as the Bo Sox are with Craig Kimbrel. Tigers get K-Rod cheaper and now have the flexibility with their payroll to add another arm or 2 for the pen at the back end of games to support what Wilson and Hardy do in the 7th and 8th innings. And that's why I love this deal for the Tigers and Avila, and I give him an A- on that deal because I don't think there's a ton of or enough mileage on K-Rod's arm yet to say he's washed up or is going to immediately regress going into 2016. I still think he can hit the 90-mile-per-hour mark on the radar gun, do that consistently enough with the changeup mixed in there to get it done consistently as a closer for the Tigers in 2016. And for a cheap price, and really a bargain compared to what, as you were saying too and getting at, in what Craig Kimbrel is making there for the Bo Sox as their closer. And now they already have all that money added onto their payroll through that move, and maybe that'll restrict what they do now, adding other pieces, even though they are the mighty large Bo Sox. Hey, they always make moves no matter what the circumstances are. They don't care about their payroll. They just care about the bottom line, which is making moves to get better and to win games. So for them, it really doesn't affect them too much with their payroll. They're not caring as much about that. And that's why they have the capability and or flexibility to go out and get a guy like Craig Kimbrel, where the Tigers saw the writing on the wall. Well, if we get Craig Kimbrel, we can't add as many valuable assets to support K-Rod and the other guys at the back end of games. So they said, let's go get a guy who's cheaper. They did so, and I think they got a better move. Overall move than what the Bo Sox did in getting Kimbrel and in giving up what they had to get that guy in Kimbrel.
Okay. The only other bit of news that I'm aware of is that definitely they picked up guys and hired guys to advance the analytics, a little bit more of an advancement in international scouting, and J.D. Martinez won the Tigers Player of the Year award.
Deservedly so.
He did so for sure. So
yep.
It was actually a very exciting couple weeks. I was looking forward to chatting with you, getting your insight on a couple things. Maybe when we meet again, we'll talk about some things that are about to happen in the winter meetings and look around the major leagues and talk about the ML. Talk about the AL and NL MVPs, talk about who wins the Cy Young and things like that, and look around the hot stove.
Those have already been passed out, by the way.
Yep.
The Cy Young Award winners, the MVP Award winners, Donaldson getting
it's what's called a tease, Vito.
Harper getting it. But we'll talk about that next week on the podcast on the 18th episode. Almost the 20, but 18 is the number for next week's episode. We'll talk to you then. And to sum it up, so far so good for Avila. Good start to his tenure. And good start to our second batch of episodes.
Our season premiere went very well.
Yes, it did. For, what is this now? The
season
winter
2?
Season almost now of the show?
Yeah,
so,
the hot stove edition, the
off-season, right, edition of the podcast. And we'll keep going strong here throughout the off-season on Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. Talk to you next week.